I'm Dave Dinkle, and I wanted to go over some deals I completed this week. There's three examples of wholesale deals showing profits in excess of $29,000 each. What's important is each was done with no money needed from the students or investors. This is the first one we're going to look at. As you can see, I've taken the HUD statement, the A to B side. Remember, this is an A to B and B to C transaction, and I've taken out all the pertinent information about each of the parties. I've done that in each of the HUD statements you'll see, and that's just so that everybody's happy with you didn't show my deal. Sometimes end buyers may be unhappy and have buyer's remorse when they see how much money the investor made for frankly sitting down at the closing table or not even coming to the closing that lasted 20 minutes or an hour. What's important is on the left side of the transaction, it's called the borrower or buyer side. This would be the student in this case. On the right side is the seller. You can remember this because the letter B comes before the letter S. So buyer side, seller side. This number is the bottom line after all expenses that were taken out and credits that were given for accrued taxes. It may be hard to see that, so what I did is I blew that up. And this is that little box, and here's the bottom line. In this case, a student needed $269,819.88 to close. He had no money. So I did a transactional funding on this. We'll see that on the next B2C statement. Now, one thing I wanted to show you is here's an earnest money deposit that he put up. I call that a low earnest money deposit. It's $1,000. On the next HUD transaction we're going to look at, you'll see that the student put up no money, and I'll talk about that then. So here we are. We've got a $1,000 earnest money deposit and $269,000 that the student needs. So here's the B2C HUD statement. And if you notice, what we're going to look at first is, remember, this is the buyer over here who is now the end buyer C. And here's the student who's the seller, so buyer, seller. And here's what's important. With all the deductions taken out, including the return of the transactional funding funds, this is the bottom line profit for whoever the investor is. I've enlarged it again for you, and I can't say anything except when I get these faxed over to me or sent to me. Sometimes they're blurred. Here's his profit. That's the net profit after his cost, closing cost, and everything else. $29,001.62. There's my transactional funding, by the way, $269,819.88. So I got my transactional funding back. This transaction took place the same day. A to B and B to C, probably about 2 hours apart. Now here's what I wanted you to see. The end buyer C, put up a $5,000 deposit. That's very important because the student put up $1,000. And if for some reason the end buyer C didn't close and he had a $5,000 earnest money deposit up, the student could still make money. An investor could still make money because he'd lose his $1,000 if he couldn't close, but he'd make $5,000 here. So he'd earn $4,000 and never close the transaction. Now the caveat to that is you have to know that the closing agent that you're going to work with will release that deposit. If he says, oh, I can't do that because I have to have both parties sign off on it, then you need to put an agreement, a clause or clauses into your original contract that authorize him to do that, as well as relieve him of any liability, and both you and the end buyer sign that. So there it is. There's the first one we're going to look at, $29,001.62 after all closing costs and transactional funding expenses, everything else. Oh, by the way, this student did not sell it himself. Two parties came in, each got $4,000 as joint venture fees. Now, if you said to me, are those people licensed because that's a commission? It's not a commission, and I don't care if they were licensed. For you guys who are realtors looking at this and saying to yourself, you can't do that, that's a commission. It's not a commission. It's a joint venture fee. It's a partnership fee. It's whatever you want to call it, but it is not commissions. The only other thing I want to mention is it was a no money, no credit, no risk transaction. And if you say to me, well, gee, he put up a $1,000 earnest money deposit on the A to B leg, yes, but to me that's a no money transaction when I loaned him $269,000. If it was a hard money situation, he'd be asked to put up $70,000 or something like that. So to me, this is technically no money, no credit, no risk. This transaction was done two different closing agents. The A to B was at one closing agent, B to C at another. Oftentimes get the question, well, the original seller is an REO or it's a lender and they want their closing agent to do the transaction and he's in another state. Doesn't matter. If your transactional funder knows what he's doing, he can do this. For your sake, I'm telling you ahead of time, what you want to try and do is always control the B to C side of the transaction. You don't have to, but it's very helpful if you do that ahead of time. It's very helpful so you know what's happening because that's where your profit is coming out of. So here's the next particular one we're going to look at. Again, this is the A to B HUD statement. Buyer on this side, which is the student in this case, seller on this side. Again, this is the bottom line number that the student needs to close this transaction. And I, again, enlarged it, but gosh, it doesn't enlarge all that well. $73,842.13. The question becomes, I don't have any money. Don't need any money. You need $73,000. Transactional funder will supply that. Now here's what's important. I put no earnest money deposit. Do you see an earnest money deposit there? Absolutely not. How do you do that? Because any realtor that knows his salt, or people that are practicing license without a law, will tell you you can't have a contract that doesn't have an earnest money deposit. Wrong. The courts have upheld, and I'm not an attorney speaking from this part, but just because I've been doing it for 40 years, the courts have upheld that for good and valuable consideration doesn't have to be money. It in fact can be the contract that you're purchasing the property itself. So be careful. In this case, did he actually have no money? There it is. There's the HUD statement. But what he most likely did is what we do is we put one earnest money deposit with a closing agent that we're going to be sending all our closing business to. We get an escrow letter from him and we use that over and over again. For an attorney, that may be a little bit of a problem because he may say to you, bar requires I open a new account for each one of the escrow deposits. Okay, then find either a non-attorney owned closing agent or have him give you a letter that's editable that he can change when you need a deposit for a property like this. We've had no problem getting both attorneys and non-attorney owned closing firms give us those escrow letters. So here's the B2C HUD, the second leg of the transaction. Again, buyer on this side, but now the buyer is the end buyer. This is the person who's going to ultimately own the property. And here's the student seller. So this is the amount, I mentioned it before, net bottom line profit on this transaction because everything's been taken out, including the transactional funding. So I blew it up here, and of course it's obviously, you can't read it, but here it is. $36,318.61. Pure profit. There's my transaction funding, $73,431.71. And here's what I want to show you. In this transaction, the end buyer put up $5,000 earnest money deposit, just as the end buyer did in the last one. Remember I said it was $5,000? So if in fact he didn't close, he would not lose his $1,000 deposit because he didn't have one up with the A to B side. So he would collect this $5,000 earnest money deposit from the C buyer. He'd earn $5,000 without ever closing. Again, the caveat to that is you got to know beforehand that your closing agent has guts and grit and will release the money to you. Otherwise, he'll sit on it and say both of you have to sign off. What that means is the only way you're going to get the money is probably to split whatever the earnest money deposit is so you can get it out of the hand of the closing agent, so to speak. Again, no money, no credit, and no risk. Now here's the last one. This is the last one I'm going to do today, and it's interesting because for a number of reasons which I'll go through. So the bottom line is this investor called me up, said I need to do transactional funding. Can you handle it? That's the amount. Now, again, I enlarged it for you, but it's $369,411.74. In transactional funding, the funding person or entity funds 100% of the purchase price. There's the purchase price. So this particular investor had, I don't care how much money he had, he didn't have enough to do the transaction. If he had had any money, he would have put it up, so he didn't have to pay the transactional funding fee on that amount. So $369,000. Here's what I want you to see. No earnest money deposit. That's fine. No earnest money deposit. Now that's okay because again, what's important here is the end buyer C doesn't close, then you're going to get his deposit. Let's go on for a second. Here's the B2C HUD. Now let's look at what happened here. Remember I told you buyer over here is the end buyer C, seller here. First thing we're going to look at, what's the net profit? And I blew it up here for you if you can't see it. $129,610.28. That's $129,000, guys. For you guys who are looking at, gee, is this possible to do this any place but wherever you are, Dave? Why not? For you guys who are scattered around the country and you say to yourselves, man, I'm in the toughest market there is. I'm in Vegas. I'm in LA. I'm in God knows where you are, New York City. I don't care. What you need to do is find motivated sellers, not ones who tell you they're motivated, but ones who want empathy from you for their problem. This is one of them. Now, let me go on with what else is going on in here. There's the $369,000 that I loaned him. Here is the problem. The end buyer put up no earnest money deposit. What happened here? Well, the investor, this is his first deal, and he got very wound up with these guys who are buyers are big hitters. They have a lot of money. Hey, people that have a lot of money try to take advantage of people who don't have a lot of money but have an asset they want. So they literally fed on their reputation and said, we don't need a deposit. Okay, but what would happen here if he lost this deal, if the C buyer didn't close? He made $129,000. I'm going to tell you right now, this property is worth at least another $150,000 to $200,000. He took the first offer he got, and it's not bad. I'm not condemning the investor here. It's a great profit, no money deal, and here it is. No money, no credit, no risk, and by the way, no experience. So how do you do this? This property was found driving for dollars. So was one of the other ones we did before this. So the point of this exercise for the 3 deals I've showed you is not to say, here's huge profits. They're not huge. This is a huge profit, $129,000. But again, the point here is the investors in these 3 deals had no money in them. So if you say to me, well, what's the return on capital? I don't care. It's infinite. $129,000 divided by 0 is called infinity. Whoever is listening to this, is it possible for you to do deals like this? I don't know. It's up to you. If you believe you can and you work at it hard enough, you will. Here's real people just like you who are doing real deals. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you got some good tips out of this material.